So the book that I am, of which I'm the co-editor, is titled Ritual Life in Early Christianity. And it wants to present the field of ritual studies as it can be applied to the analysis of Christian origins and the New Testament. There's three broad categories which we editors came up with. We wanted to get away from the usual titles of baptism, Eucharist, prayer, which tend to isolate early Christians or Jesus assemblies and present them as being rather distinct or separate from their Roman period context. So we chose very broad categories, and each category gets a variety of treatments in particular chapters. The three categories are interacting with the divine, interaction among group members, and ritual, innovation, and dispute. And we feel that these will give us new ways and new topics to think about for early Christianity and Christian origins. We still treat things like the communal meal, baptism, but we also look at the areas of sacrifice, honoring the gods, how ritual can be used to create group identity, to position a group with respect to other groups, and sometimes to overcome division within a group. So some of these areas partake of what is known as social identity theory, and looking really at the social processes behind ritual. So in addition to being an editor of the book, I also contributed a chapter, and that chapter is in the Accessing the Divine segment. I wanted to use ritual studies in a case study, and I looked at the texts of Romans and Galatians, which talk rather briefly but intriguingly about an existing ritual, namely the Abba prayer within early Christianity. Through the use of ritual studies theory, and also drawing upon analysis from psychology and physiology about altered states of consciousness, and what is known as breath work, deep breathing, which can be part of meditation and can induce altered states of consciousness, I came up with the following theory. In some Pauline assemblies, particularly, or assemblies known to Paul, so Galatia and Rome, there was some sort of prayer happening. People felt that they were becoming close to God. And eventually, they cried out, Abba, or Father. It's no coincidence, I feel, that it is only in this context that Paul mentions his adoption theology, namely that those who pray and those who are in the assembly have been adopted by God. My hypothesis is that this ecstatic prayer was something that Paul wanted to use and do damage control on. He felt that those in the assembly might feel that they had achieved self-divinization. And therefore, in response to this, he came up with his adoption theology, which is sophisticated but rather convoluted. And essentially he states that, yes, we are sons, but we are only infants now. We will not achieve full sonship. We will not achieve full inheritance of the status of sonship until the eschaton, until we are dead. There's a number of issues logically with his argument. For example, in the Roman world, adoption happens when the father dies and the inheritance is passed on to the children. God doesn't die. Therefore, Paul's metaphor is somewhat a bit shaky at some points. Also, in the Roman world, which I argue was a larger context for the topic of adoption rather than whatever it might have been seen as in Judaism, in the Roman world, adoption was to the individual, not the group, and had both issues of present status and future inheritance. My theory is that those in the Roman and the Galatian assemblies felt that they were focusing on the present status. We are sons of God now. Paul says, no, I want to move that to the future, so don't feel too grand now. In the future, you will have full status, for now you are only children. And Paul makes a rather subtle but rather effective interplay between the words huios, son, and tekna, child. And he moves between these two in order to couple those with his eschatology theology and his adoption theology. The point of all of this is that I somewhat deprivileged Paul, focused more on the ritual of the Abba prayer prior to Paul. That gave me new insights then into understand Paul's adoption theology as a response, and possibly doing damage control on what might have been, from his perspective, a rather problematic situation.